All right, so there's this really persistent misconception out there. A lot of people assume that pre-modern India, despite all its brilliant philosophy, advanced mathematics, and stunning poetry, somehow completely lacked a tradition of rigorous, factual historical writing. People tend to think it was all just myth and legend, right? Well, in this explainer, we're going to completely shatter that myth. We're looking at a monumental text from the 12th century that absolutely proves critical historical inquiry wasn't just present, but it was actually flourishing in ancient India. It's an incredible work that blends high Sanskrit poetry with razor-sharp political analysis.
Okay, let's dive right into this title. The text is called the Rajatarangini. And when we break down the original Sanskrit, Raja translates to king, and Taranga means wave. So put them together and you literally get the River of Kings. Now what's profoundly interesting here is the metaphor embedded right there in the title. You see, the author, Kalhana, didn't just view history as some static, boring list of dates. He saw it as a continuously flowing river. And in this river, individual rulers and even entire powerful dynasties are merely passing waves. They rise up, they crest with all this immense power, and then they inevitably crash and disappear right back into the water. It's honestly such a beautiful, humbling way to look at the impermanence of worldly authority.
And this brings us straight to the core philosophy of the man who actually wrote it. Kalhana wrote that the ideal historian should be free from love and hatred, exactly like a judge weighing evidence. Now keep in mind, this was written way back around 1148 CE. Back then, most court poets were essentially ancient PR agents, you know? They were literally hired to write these glowing, highly exaggerated praises of whoever their royal patron happened to be. But Kalhana, he explicitly rejected that entire concept. He demanded absolute objectivity. He sounded remarkably like a modern, impartial judge, fully dedicated to uncovering the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be for the people sitting in power.
Part 1. Meet Kalhana of Kashmir.
To really understand Kalhana, we have to understand the world he was living in. He lived in the early 12th century in the Kashmir Valley, primarily during the rule of King Jayasimha of the Lohara dynasty. And let me tell you, it was not a peaceful time. The era was defined by deep political instability, endless court intrigues, armed rebellions, widespread corruption, and just brutal dynastic struggles. Now, Kalhana's father, Champaka, was actually a minister and a high-ranking court official. That meant Kalhana had a literal front-row seat to all of this chaos. But this chaotic environment actually acted as a massive catalyst for him. It's exactly what inspired him to sit down and document how rulers actually succeed, and honestly, more often, how they fail.
But Kalhana wasn't just some observant bystander. He was phenomenally well-equipped to analyze exactly what he was seeing. Coming from a learned Brahmin family, he received expert training across the board. I'm talking mastery of Sanskrit grammar and poetics, known as kavya. He studied deep philosophy and Puranic literature, which gave him a solid grasp of India's ancient narratives. Crucially, he was also heavily trained in political theory, genealogy, and chronology. Add to that his intimate familiarity with classical epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and you can see that Kalhana brought a razor-sharp, highly educated, and deeply analytical mind to the daunting task of writing history.
Moving right along to Part 2, Mapping the 8 Waves.
Before we break down those individual books, I just want you to take a second and absorb this number. 7,826. That is the exact number of Sanskrit verses Kalhana meticulously composed around 1148 to 1149 CE to create the Rajatarangini. The sheer, monumental scale of this effort is just staggering. It's a massive, strictly chronological account of the rulers of Kashmir, spanning all the way from legendary antiquity straight up to Kalhana's very own present day.
Now, it's important to point out that not all of those thousands of verses are strictly factual by today's standards. Kalhana's work actually evolves dramatically as you read through it. The first 3 tarangas, or waves, contain the mythic origins of Kashmir, early legends, and these super-long dynastic lists that kind of blur the lines between history and myth. But then, as we cross into tarangas 4 through 8, a major shift happens. From about the 7th century onward, the text transforms into highly reliable political history. He starts covering major verifiable dynasties, and by the time you hit Book 8, he's detailing his near-contemporary world with just incredible precision. The book literally transitions from ancient legend right into dependable reality before your eyes.
And this brilliantly illustrates the incredible breadth of his subject matter. Across these 8 waves, Kalhana documents a truly fascinating cast of characters. You've got Lalataditya Muktopida, remembered as one of Kashmir's most celebrated and expansive rulers.
Then there's Avantivarman. He wasn't just a military guy, he was an incredible administrator famous for massive, life-changing irrigation works. On the much darker side, Kalhana profiles Harsha of Kashmir, a brilliant but deeply complex and tyrannical ruler whose reign ended in absolute turmoil. And finally, he writes about Jayasimha, his own contemporary, literally evaluating him in real time. He impartially covers it all: the brilliance, the administrative reforms, the total madness, and the tragic downfalls of these leaders.
But I want to make something super clear here. This text is definitely not just a dry, boring list of kings fighting battles. It is so much more than that. Kalhana captures these incredibly vibrant descriptions of the Kashmir Valley's stunning rivers, mountains, and pilgrimage sites. He takes the time to record the mundane but absolutely vital details of everyday administration, stuff like taxation, land grants, and military organization. He watches judicial conduct and maps out the intricacies of royal ceremonies. He even details the highly active role of women in Kashmiri politics, along with cultural patronage and societal moral decline. It's really a rich, beautifully poetic time capsule of an entire civilization's daily life.
Which brings us to part 3, Thinking Like a Judge.
So, how did he actually piece all of this together? I mean, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? If you are living in 1148 CE, you have no internet, no modern archaeological databases, and you are totally surrounded by court flatterers who literally lie for a living, how on earth do you uncover the actual truth of centuries past?
Well, he did it by acting like a detective, and in a move that was incredibly rare for his time, Kalhana explicitly stated his sources. He didn't just blindly trust old myths, he actively went out and found hard, physical evidence. Sure, he consulted earlier historical chronicles, but then he cross-referenced them with actual physical temple inscriptions. He tracked down official land grants and studied ancient coins just to verify royal names and dates. He dug deep into private family records and carefully weighed out oral traditions and local legends. He was essentially doing full-on 12th century archaeology to build a totally factual foundation.
And all this detective work fueled a remarkably strict mental checklist. Step 1, examine the previous works written by others. Step 2, verify those claims against physical inscriptions and official land grants. Step 3, when two sources disagree, which, let's be honest, happens constantly in history, compare the contradictory narratives side by side. And finally, step 4, evaluate their plausibility based on plain old human nature and logic. He literally turned historical research into a systematic, active process of critical thinking.
Now, let's wrap things up with part 4, the legacy of Kalhana.
Look, beyond just the dates and the names, Kalhana was weaving some profoundly powerful ethical lessons into his poetry. The major themes of the Rajatarangini are completely timeless. He's constantly reminding the reader of the impermanence of power. Remember those crashing waves we talked about earlier? He heavily emphasizes the moral responsibility of rulers, vividly showing the disastrous, real-world consequences of greed and tyranny. But above all, he champions the supreme value of justice and wisdom. He was writing history to explicitly teach future kings how to behave, basically reminding them that their moral conduct is what ultimately dictates their eternal legacy.
Let's quickly trace the journey of this absolute masterpiece. Born in the early 12th century, Kalhana finalizes his massive composition right around 1149 CE. But what's really amazing is that his work was so deeply respected, it didn't just end with him. In the 15th and 16th centuries, later chroniclers like Jonaraja and Srivara picked up right where he left off, and they continued the history of Kashmir straight into the Mughal era. Finally, fast forward to the modern era, and brilliant translations by scholars like Oral Stein and R.S. Pandit opened up this Sanskrit treasure trove, sharing its brilliant insights with historians all over the globe.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Why does all of this actually matter to you and me today? Well, first off, the Rajatarangini remains the principal, foundational source for understanding early and medieval Kashmir. Honestly, without it, our knowledge of the region would just be fundamentally broken. Second, it brilliantly connects local Kashmiri history to the grander, overarching narratives of the ancient Maurya and Kushan empires. Third, and arguably most importantly, it acts as undeniable proof that rigorous, critical historical inquiry was very much alive and flourishing in pre-modern India. It's a true masterpiece because it perfectly blends the soaring beauty of high Sanskrit poetry with cold, hard, objective political analysis.
We've explored the man, his brilliant methods, and his absolute masterpiece. Kalhana taught us that no matter how mighty a ruler seems in the moment, their time and power is ultimately fleeting, which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. If history truly is a flowing river, and even the absolute most powerful dynasties are just temporary waves that will inevitably crash against the shore, What kind of legacy are our modern leaders leaving in the River of Kings today? It's definitely something to think about the next time you turn on the news. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the waves.